You lost 5 billion. People like you don't belong in first class. The words cracked through the terminal like a whip, louder than the boarding announcements. Heads turned, necks craned, and for a moment the hum of travelers dragging suitcases and sipping coffee froze in midair. She was standing at the velvet rope of the first-class boarding lane, a tailored coral dress draped over her frame, suitcase handle in her left hand, phone pressed to her right ear. A woman moving with focus, not flash yet, the accusation painted her like a spectacle. Two uniformed officers stood tight on either side, summoned not by any crime, but by suspicion dressed as authority. Their shoulders squared, their stares sharp. They boxed her in as though she had stepped out of line. And just behind, leaning with crossed arms, the airline's floor manager let her voice cut through again, each word dipped in scorn. 5 billion! That's what your kind does, wrecks companies, ruins investors. And now you think you deserve champagne service and a leather seat? A murmur rippled through the passengers waiting nearby. Some raised their phones, lenses tilting like curious eyes, eager to capture scandal. Others smirked, whispering, "Who is she?" Or, "Did you hear what they said?" But she didn't flinch. Her grip on the suitcase was steady, her expression locked somewhere between resolve and restraint. The only motion was the faint tightening of her jaw, the kind of control that speaks louder than shouting. Before we continue, imagine this. You're in an airport terminal, strangers circling, authority pressing in, and someone spits an accusation you know is built on prejudice, not truth. What would you do? Shout back? Or stand firm? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe dignity matters even when tested, hit like and subscribe. These stories matter. Now, back to her. The younger officer shifted uneasily, glancing at the crowd as if realizing the performance had an audience bigger than expected. The older one, jaw clenched, kept his gaze locked on her like she was a suspect rather than a customer with a boarding pass. "Step aside," the floor manager ordered, her tone rehearsed, like she had spoken those words too many times before. "Verification is required." The CEO, though no one knew it yet, let her eyes flick briefly toward the gate sign overhead. First class, priority boarding. Then she lowered her gaze back to the officer at her right, meeting his stare without blinking. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. The silence itself was an act of defiance, sharper than any rebuttal. Passengers behind the rope leaned in. A teenager whispered, "Is this for real?" A businessman muttered, "Unbelievable." Phones kept rolling. The scene was no longer private, it was a stage. And at the center, she stood as if carved in stone, still, calm, immovable. The storm was just beginning. Whispers grew like a tide lapping against walls of glass. The terminal, once filled with the ordinary rhythm of rolling suitcases and casual chatter, had shifted into something else, an audience waiting for the next blow. The officer on her left adjusted his belt, clearing his throat as if to signal dominance. The floor manager tilted her chin higher, satisfied that her words had taken root in the crowd. "You think money makes you untouchable," she sneered. "But when you lose billions, you lose your place up here. Sit in the back where you belong." A laugh broke out from somewhere behind the rope. A young man in a polo shirt muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "She probably forged the ticket." A woman clutched her pearls, whispering, "Scandal like this. Oh, this is newsworthy." Phones hovered higher. Screens glowed. Some passengers filmed for curiosity, others for cruelty, all waiting to see a woman's dignity stripped at the gate. She remained still. Her coral dress caught the sterile overhead light, her suitcase wheels rooted to the marble floor. She shifted slightly, the faintest inhale through her nose, but her eyes never wavered. Before we continue, pause here. If you were the one at the center of a storm, strangers gawking, phones recording, accusations piling up, would your silence break, or would you let the silence speak for you? Comment your word, shatter or stand. Now back to her. The younger officer finally spoke, voice clipped but uneasy. "Ma'am, please cooperate. Step aside." His partner gave a curt nod, reinforcing the command, though sweat glistened at his hairline. The manager moved closer, arms crossed tight, lips curling. "Funny how the mighty fall," she hissed. "From boardroom tables to police escorts, all because you couldn't handle billions." Her tone carried both venom and theater. She wanted witnesses. The woman in coral didn't answer. She slowly adjusted the phone against her ear, her silence so deliberate it was louder than their taunts. A businessman in the crowd noticed, leaning toward his colleague. She doesn't look guilty. She looks in control. The colleague scoffed but kept filming. Control? She's surrounded. Yet something in the air shifted subtle, invisible. Not everyone was convinced anymore. A father holding his daughter whispered, "This doesn't feel right." The child tugged at his sleeve, asking, "Why are they being mean to her?" The officer on her right frowned, caught between orders and unease. The floor manager noticed and barked sharper, "Do your job. Detain her." But in that moment, no one realized the trap wasn't closing on her. It was closing on them. The airport had become more than a terminal. It was a stage, and every camera aimed at her was about to capture a story no one expected. The storm gathered weight, but she hadn't moved an inch. "Papers, now!" The floor manager's demand cracked through the air, sharper than the boarding announcement echoing across the gate. Her arms were still crossed, but her smirk had sharpened into something colder, a performance crafted for an audience. The officers flanked closer, the younger one trying to sound authoritative. "Ma'am, your identification. Immediately." She didn't move at first. Her eyes lingered on the first class, priority boarding sign above the velvet rope, then returned to the officer with unshaken calm. Her silence stretched long enough to make the crowd restless. "Don't stall," the manager pressed, her voice dripping contempt. "You lost billions. You don't deserve to stand here unless you prove otherwise." A murmur swept across the waiting passengers. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned. One woman whispered, "Why would she need to prove herself? She bought a ticket, didn't she?" Another responded, "If they're asking, she must have done something." Finally, the woman in coral shifted. With deliberate patience, she unzipped her handbag, slid out a slim leather wallet, and withdrew a passport. The cover gleamed navy blue with embossed gold letters. She extended it forward, her hand steady. The officer took it, flipped it open, and hesitated. His brows twitched as his eyes skimmed the details. Before he could say a word, the manager snatched it from his hand. "Diplomatic passport?" she scoffed, holding it high for the crowd to see, her laughter sharp and theatrical. "Fake. A prop. Another trick from someone desperate to play important." She let it snap shut and tossed it carelessly onto the counter behind her. Gasps rippled through the terminal. The businessman filming muttered, "That didn't look fake." The father with his daughter whispered, "This is wrong." But the phones kept rolling. "Before we continue, put yourself in her place. Your real identity mocked, your documents tossed aside, your dignity dismissed in front of strangers. Would you fight fire with fire, or would you let composure be the answer? Drop your choice below. Now back to her." She adjusted the phone against her ear, her expression still unreadable. The coral fabric of her dress barely shifted as she straightened her posture. The manager leaned in closer, her voice cutting. "Step back, or we'll have you escorted out like the fraud you are." The older officer nodded stiffly, reaching toward her suitcase handle. The crowd leaned in, sensing escalation. A young traveler whispered, "This is going too far." But in the woman's silence, in the way her jawline held steady, something unshakable radiated. She was not cornered. They were. The older officer shifted, his boots pressing against the marble floor. His hand reached down, slow at first, then firm, gripping the chrome handle of her suitcase. "This bag stays here," he muttered, his tone final. The sound of metal clinking against his gloves echoed louder than the boarding call behind them. The crowd drew in a collective breath, phones tilted closer. A teenager in the back whispered, "Are they seriously taking her luggage?" Her hand tightened around the handle before he could pull it away. Not frantic, not desperate, measured, resolute. For a moment, the officer tugged, expecting resistance to break quickly. It didn't. The floor manager's voice rang sharp, fueling the humiliation. "You see? She's clinging to lies. If that suitcase had truth in it, she wouldn't fight to keep it." Passengers gasped. Someone muttered, "That makes no sense." Another said louder, "She bought that ticket, that's her bag." But the performance continued. The officer gave another jerk. Papers rattled in his breast pocket. Her stance didn't shift. She looked at him, calm, steady, her phone still pressed to her ear. "Before we continue, picture yourself there, your property in someone else's hands, strangers watching, dignity dangling on a stage you never asked for. Do you let go, or do you hold firm? Drop your word below. Release or resist." Now back to her. The younger officer glanced uneasily at the crowd, then at his partner. Sweat glistened on his temple. He knew eyes were everywhere. The woman in coral didn't pull harder, didn't twist. She simply anchored herself, the way roots hold when wind rips through trees. Her stillness unsettled the officer more than a struggle ever could. The manager snapped, desperate for victory. "Call security. Call the police. This is fraud in plain sight." Gasps rippled again. A father lifted his daughter onto his hip, shielding her from the spectacle, whispering, "Remember this. This is what injustice looks like." The officer gave one last tug, harder this time. The suitcase wheels skidded against the marble, screeching faintly. Yet her grip didn't falter. Her other hand adjusted the phone slightly, her voice low, calm, barely audible to the crowd, but sharp enough for the person on the line. "Rachel," she said, steady as stone, "activate the feed." "Oh." The words were quiet, but they carried like thunder. For a long beat, the terminal felt like it was holding its breath. The officer's knuckles whitened around the suitcase handle, her grip equally firm, two opposing forces locked in silence. Then, a voice broke through. "Let her go," said an older man in a tailored blazer, his voice calm but firm. He stood 2 rows back, silver hair catching the harsh overhead light. "She hasn't raised her voice once. You're the ones making a scene." "Ugh." The crowd stirred. A woman clutching her boarding pass nodded. "He's right. She's just standing there." The floor manager spun toward them, her lips curled. "Stay out of this. This doesn't concern you." But the words fell flat. Too many eyes had seen too much. A young woman with her phone lifted high spoke louder. "It concerns all of us, because this could be any of us." Her declaration cut deeper than the manager's order. Passengers murmured, some stepping closer, their cameras steady. The spectacle was shifting into a trial and the staff were on the wrong side. Before we continue, imagine this. You're in the crowd. You see power misused, dignity trampled. Do you stay silent or do you raise your voice? Comment below. Watch or speak. Now back to the gate. The officer's hand hesitated on the suitcase. His partner shifted uncomfortably. The crowd's noise had changed from whispers to protest. "She's not resisting," a man said flatly. "This is harassment," another added. "Check the cameras, it's all on record," someone shouted from the back. The father, holding his daughter, raised his voice now, louder than before. "She's calmer than all of you. If anyone looks guilty, it's not her." Gasps rippled again. Phone zoomed closer. The manager's face flushed red, veins visible at her temple. "Enough. She is a fraud and she will be treated as one." The words boomeranged. Instead of silencing the crowd, they ignited it. The younger officer looked toward the woman in coral. Her jaw was steady, her eyes sharp, her phone pressed close to her ear. She didn't flinch. She didn't plead. She simply existed like a mirror, reflecting the panic of those who tried to cage her. The suitcase handle was still in her grip, but control of the room had already slipped into her hands. The storm was no longer hers to weather. It was theirs to answer for. The floor manager's smile returned, sharper this time, the kind of grin sharpened by desperation. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the marble, arms folded like a verdict waiting to be read. "Look at her," she sneered, her voice cutting across the crowd. Dressed up in a bright dress, parading through first class like she belongs here. People like her destroy companies, bleed investors dry, and then pretend they're still important. Gasps rolled through the terminal. Passengers exchanged glances, their phones capturing every syllable. The silver-haired man muttered under his breath, "She's digging her own grave." The officer on the left swallowed hard, shifting his weight. His grip on the suitcase handle loosened slightly, as though the manager's words carried more heat than the standoff itself. But the woman in coral didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her phone was still at her ear, her breath even, her jawline carved in composure. The manager wasn't finished. Her voice grew louder, dripping with venom. "She's a disgrace. She's not first-class material. She belongs at the back of the plane, if anywhere at all." A chorus of murmurs erupted. A woman near the velvet rope snapped back. "That's not how you treat people," another shouted. "This isn't protocol, it's profiling." Before we continue, think of this. Have you ever heard prejudice dressed as procedure? Have you seen someone use rules to justify cruelty? Comment your word, policy, or prejudice. Now back to the gate. The younger officer's jaw tightened. He looked at his partner, then at the crowd, then at the woman still standing steady. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. The father holding his daughter raised his voice above the rising noise. "She's calmer than all of you combined. If this is your proof, it's worthless." Applause broke out just a ripple, small but sharp. Phones tilted higher. The tide was turning. But the manager, blind to the shift, doubled down. She leaned forward, pointing at the suitcase still caught between them. She's hiding something in there. That bag is evidence. And if you don't remove her right now, you're failing your duty. The older officer pulled harder at the handle, but the woman's grip held. Her silence was iron. Her eyes lifted just enough to meet the manager's glare. Calm, unbroken. In that look was something chilling, not fear, not anger, but inevitability. The crowd felt it. The officers felt it. The manager didn't be, and that mistake would cost her everything. The officer's patience snapped. With a sudden jerk, he wrenched the suitcase handle from her grip. The chrome clattered against his glove, wheels skidding across the marble as he yanked it toward the counter. Gasps ripped through the terminal. A woman shrieked, "That's theft." A teenager filming whispered into his mic, "They just stole her luggage." The floor manager's smile widened, triumphant. Finally, evidence in our hands. She turned to the crowd as if she were the hero of the scene, voice rising. This is what fraud looks like, clinging to lies until the truth is ripped away. But the crowd didn't cheer. They recoiled. Murmurs swelled into outrage. Unbelievable. This is harassment. She hasn't done a thing. The officer set the suitcase on the counter with a heavy thud. His partner hovered, uncertain, sweat glistening at his hairline. The older one fumbled with the zipper. The woman in coral didn't lunge. She didn't protest. She let them. Her phone remained at her ear, her other hand relaxed at her side. The silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Before we continue, imagine this. Your property torn from you, strangers watching, the world deciding your guilt before a word of defense. Do you explode or do you let their aggression expose itself? Comment, fight or wait. Now back to her. The officer tugged the zipper halfway before stopping, realizing dozens of phones were locked on him. His hands shook as he looked at the passengers, their stares unflinching. The silver-haired man called out again, louder this time. "This is unlawful. Everyone here can see it. She hasn't broken a single rule." The manager snapped back, her voice cracking under the weight of the crowd. "Silence! This is procedure." But the word procedure no longer carried authority. It sounded hollow, even desperate. The father with his daughter shouted over her, "Procedure isn't manhandling someone who's done nothing." Applause followed his words, scattering like sparks. The manager's face reddened deeper. She gestured wildly to the officers. "Open it! Expose her!" But the officers hesitated. The younger one whispered, "There are too many cameras." The older one clenched his jaw, torn between orders and the tide of witnesses. Through it all, the woman in coral remained unshaken. Her gaze swept the room once, meeting the crowd, then returned to the phone at her ear. She spoke just above a whisper, but it carried through the tension like a blade. "Rachel, begin recording. Broadcast live." Every syllable landed heavy. The tide had turned, and the storm now belonged to her. The terminal quieted, not because the scene had calmed, but because every phone in the air had caught those words. Broadcast live. The woman in coral straightened, no longer holding her suitcase, no longer restrained. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She shifted her phone slightly away from her ear, pressing a button on the side, and her words rolled steady, deliberate. "Rachel," she said, "confirm executive override. Connect this feed to the boardroom. Let every director see what's happening here." The response came instantly, crisp and clear, spilling into the silence. "Confirmed. Live feed established. The board is watching." The crowd gasped. The silver-haired man whispered, "Boardroom?" A young woman lowered her phone just enough to mutter, "She's not bluffing." The floor manager blinked, her smirk faltering. What did you say?" The officers froze, caught in the sudden shift of gravity. Their authority felt thin now, stretched too tight under the weight of eyes both in the terminal and far beyond. Before we continue, imagine this. One sentence changes the entire room. Those who mocked now stumble. Those who doubted now question. If you were in her shoes, would you reveal your power slowly or all at once? Comment your choice below. Now back to the gate. The woman lowered her phone a fraction, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, then settling on the floor manager. Calm. Inevitable. "You wanted proof," she said evenly. "Now the proof watches you." Gasps rippled again. The officer holding the suitcase stepped back, as though the handle burned his hand. The younger officer glanced toward the ceiling cameras, suddenly aware that this wasn't just a spectacle, it was evidence. The floor manager stammered, her voice losing its venom. You can't possibly—" She trailed off, her certainty dissolving under the weight of silence. But the silence didn't belong to her. It belonged to the woman in coral, who let it stretch, who let the tension carve deep into the moment until the only truth left was the one she chose to speak. "I don't need to shout," she said, phone steady in her hand. "I don't need to defend myself, because the people who sign your checks are listening now." The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in disbelief and awe. Phones tilted higher. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling. The balance had shifted. And for the first time, the floor manager realized she was no longer in control of the stage. The applause faded into an electric hush, a silence so sharp it made the fluorescent hum of the ceiling lights sound deafening. Every camera stayed trained on her. Every eye was locked. The floor manager's breath came shallow, her confidence dripping away with each second of quiet. The woman in coral lowered her phone completely now, holding it loosely at her side. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice even, resonant, carrying farther than the intercom. "You've spent the last 10 minutes calling me a fraud, a failure, a thief of billions." Her gaze cut directly into the manager's. "But let me remind you of something." The manager swallowed hard, her arms twitching as though she wanted to fold them again but couldn't muster the authority. "I didn't lose billions," the woman continued. "I built them. I didn't ruin investors. I created returns that funded every one of your salaries, and I don't beg for a seat in first class." She stepped forward, the velvet rope brushing against her hip. "I own the airline that built it." Gasps detonated. A woman dropped her coffee cup, porcelain shattering on the marble. A young man filming whispered hoarsely, "She's the CEO." The silver-haired passenger muttered, almost reverent, "I knew it." The younger officer blinked rapidly, stepping back. His partner froze, his hand falling away from the suitcase as if it had turned radioactive. Before we continue, ask yourself, what happens when arrogance collides with truth? When power hidden in silence reveals itself in full? If you believe justice has a way of showing up, type justice in the comments. Now back to her. The manager stumbled over her words, her voice breaking. That's impossible. You can't." The woman cut her off with a single line. "Check the ownership registry. My name isn't just on a boarding pass. It's on every aircraft in this fleet." Phones caught the moment, the declaration etched into pixels already racing to social feeds. Passengers clapped again, louder this time, cheers echoing across the gate. The little girl in her father's arms asked softly, "Daddy, is she really the boss?" He smiled faintly, pride tugging his lips. "Yes. She's the boss of all of this." The manager's face drained of color. She looked down at the passport she had tossed aside earlier, realization dawning too late. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "Oh my God." The woman in coral didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood, steady, while the truth rearranged the entire room. For the first time, no one doubted where she belonged. The silence shattered into chaos. The floor manager's smug smile was gone, her lips trembling as though every word she had spoken had been pulled from her throat and thrown back in her face. She staggered a step backward, bumping into the counter behind her. The younger officer shifted his weight, sweat trickling down his temple. "Ma'am, we didn't know." His voice cracked, the authority gone. His partner clenched his jaw, but his hands shook as they fell away from the suitcase. Passengers weren't silent anymore. They spoke in unison, outrage layering over awe. "She told you. You humiliated her for nothing. You just tried to strip a CEO of her dignity." Phones recorded every second. The story was no longer confined to the terminal. It was spilling onto social feeds, hashtags forming in real time. The woman in coral remained steady, phone still hanging loosely at her side. Her calm presence made their panic louder. Before we continue, imagine standing there after mocking someone who turned out to be your boss, the owner of everything around you. What word would describe that feeling? Comment, shame, or fear? Now back to the terminal. The floor manager's voice quivered as she tried to salvage control. I was just following procedure." The crowd laughed bitterly. A businessman scoffed. "Procedure doesn't look like harassment." The father with his daughter shook his head. "Procedure doesn't steal someone's bag." His daughter chimed in. "They were mean to her." The manager reached for her badge, fumbling, her fingers trembling as if she thought flashing plastic could restore her authority. But the scanners on the counter blinked red, one after another, credentials already revoked by the voice that mattered most. The younger officer tried again, his tone desperate. Please, you have to understand. We thought. The woman in coral finally spoke, her voice even unshaken. You thought wrong. The words landed like a gavel. The officers lowered their eyes. The manager pressed her badge again, harder this time, the red light flickering defiantly. Her shoulders slumped. Around her, the weight of consequences settled like chains. The passengers knew it. The staff knew it. The storm had turned, and there was no undoing what had been done. The red glow from the scanner pulsed like a siren no one could ignore. The floor manager pressed her badge again, harder this time, as if force could rewrite reality. The light blinked once more cold, final, access denied. She froze, staring at the plastic in her hand as though it had betrayed her. No, she whispered. No, this can't be happening. The younger officer pulled his own card and swiped. Red. His partner tried next. Red again. One by one, the system rejected them. The sound was merciless. A chorus of denial echoing through the gate. Passengers erupted, voices clashing over each other. They're locked out. Did you see that? She just fired them on the spot. The woman in coral stood unmoved, phone now lifted back toward her lips. Her tone was calm, businesslike, as though she were in a boardroom and not a terminal. Rachel, she said, confirm suspension of all staff involved in this incident. Effective immediately. Security credentials frozen. HR will handle formal terminations. The reply came clear through the speaker. Confirmed. Suspension executed. Notification sent. The floor manager's knees buckled. She gripped the counter, pale, her lips trembling. You can't. The woman's gaze cut through her. I don't erase people. You erased yourself the moment you chose humiliation over service. Bye. Before we continue, think about this. Justice that swift, that public, would it terrify you, or would it restore your faith? Comment your word below. Now back to the gate. The younger officer stumbled back, his voice desperate. I have a family, please. The woman's eyes didn't soften, but her voice stayed measured. Then you should have thought of that before putting someone else's family through shame for your own performance. Oh. The father, holding his daughter, raised his voice above the stunned silence. That's how accountability looks. Applause spread again, this time louder, unstoppable. The scanners kept glowing red, sealing the verdict. The floor manager lowered her badge, her arrogance gone. Her career ended with a flash of light, and the woman in coral remained where she had always been, calm, steady, unbroken. The punishment was not loud. It was precise, and it was final. The clapping began like a spark one man's hands, then a child's small palms echoing, until the sound grew and rolled through the terminal like a storm. Applause filled the air, not just polite, but fierce, cathartic. Travelers who had arrived as strangers found themselves united, bound by the moment they had witnessed. She didn't raise her hand to acknowledge them. She didn't bow, didn't smile. She simply stood there for a breath, the coral of her dress vivid under the sterile fluorescent lights, suitcase handle back in her grip, calm, collected, resolute. The officers, once towering, now shrank in the background. Their badges still blinked red, useless pieces of plastic dangling from trembling fingers. The younger one looked at the floor, shame carved across his features. The older one swallowed hard, as if he could force down regret. The floor manager clutched her badge to her chest, knuckles white, eyes vacant. The arrogance had drained from her body like sand slipping through glass. She pulled her suitcase forward, wheels clicking softly over marble. The crowd parted instinctively, passengers stepping aside as if a queen was passing. Some reached out subtly, nodding with respect. Others held their phones higher, ensuring the moment was captured for millions who would soon watch it online. The silver-haired man leaned toward the young woman still filming and whispered, "This isn't just a clip, this is history." The woman nodded, her smile trembling with emotion. The kind of story people will replay when they forget what dignity looks like. She walked at an even pace, neither hurried nor slow, her steps measured like punctuation. The kind of stride that told the world she had nothing left to prove. Her phone rested loose in her right hand now, lowered, silent, its work finished. Before we continue, picture this: walking through a storm of humiliation and leaving it as though you never bent to it. Would you walk away with rage or with peace? Comment your word below. Now back to her. The terminal buzzed behind her. The applause wasn't just sound anymore. It was testimony. It was judgment delivered not by a gavel, but by collective witness. Every clap said the same thing. We saw. We know. At the velvet rope, she paused. The scanners glowed a soft green for her boarding pass. No resistance. No delay. She turned once, her eyes sweeping the space, locking for a moment on the floor manager and the officers still lingering in disgrace. Her voice was steady, deliberate, carrying across the entire gate with the weight of truth. You said I didn't belong in first class, but I built it. The seats, the service, the entire standard you tried to deny me. She let the silence stretch, then finished. And today, in front of everyone, you showed the world who truly doesn't belong here. The crowd erupted cheers, exploding, some passengers rising from their seats to applaud harder. A child clapped with both hands over her father's shoulder, shouting, "She's the boss!" The father's eyes glistened as he nodded in agreement. The floor manager sank into a chair, hollow. The younger officer rubbed his forehead with shaking fingers. The older one closed his eyes, as though wishing he could erase the last 15 minutes. But nothing could undo it. The moment was recorded, sealed, and spreading faster than any of them could comprehend. She turned back toward the jet bridge, pulling her suitcase with her. The wheels hummed again, rhythmic, unbothered. She disappeared past the gate, the applause following her like a tide, chasing her until the sound was swallowed by the curve of the corridor. Behind her, the staff remained suspended in shame, stripped of power, their careers extinguished by their own arrogance. The red scanners blinked in silence, reminders of a verdict already passed. The passengers who stayed behind didn't disperse quickly. They lingered, buzzing, replaying what they had seen. Some replayed their videos instantly, others shared them online, the first hashtags already catching. Number dignity wins, number first class justice. But her story wasn't trending because of spectacle. It was trending because of what it meant. That in a world where prejudice still dresses itself as procedure, sometimes the only answer is not a raised voice but an unshaken presence. Dignity had walked through Gate 12 that day, quiet, certain, unstoppably, and the world would remember.